Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, I'm going to be honest here, folks. This is going to be a rant as well as a review on the 1997 horror sequel, Night of the Demons 3. Now, this film was also known as Demon House in overseas markets in the UK. Now, before I get into my destruction and mauling of this movie, I want to give a special shout out to a YouTuber and longtime subscriber, as well as friend of mine, who I'm going to name Mr. Kenna. He sent me this DVD, I believe, a while back. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, and I apologize. But I believe he sent me this DVD, and I want to give him a shout out to thank him for his kindness, and I definitely appreciate the gesture. That being said, I thought this movie sucked. I thought this was a pretty shitty sequel, and while yes, this is not one of the worst films I've ever seen, this is not one of the worst sequels that I've ever seen, this honestly might be one of the most dull sequels that I've seen. So it does rank pretty highly in that particular area. Now, the film was directed by a guy named Jim Kaufman, and he has some experience behind the camera. He was a second unit director for Scanners, for Dracula 2000. He did some TV work, and he did a lot of TV shows after he did this movie. And this is the kind of director, to me personally, that doesn't really have the chops to do feature films. It's a guy who can do a serviceable enough job with a TV show for like one or two episodes, or a show that's a low budget or isn't even trying to do anything that's really that ambitious or unique or different. Like, for instance, he directed some episodes of Big Wolf on Campus. I enjoy that show, but direction is not really one of the things about that show that is, let's just say, something that is particularly noteworthy or something that's going to stick with you. And I don't think I also don't think the standards are that high when it comes to direction for a show like Big Wolf on Campus. That being said, he seems serviceable enough when it comes to that particular wheelhouse, but when he's doing a feature film, he seems out of his depth, and it's one of those instances where he knows what the shots are, but he just doesn't know why these shots are used in certain sequences and how they should be used. For instance, there's a lot of ambitious camera work in this, but it's very hollow because there's really not a lot of overall impact, and none of these techniques really affect the mood and atmosphere. They don't really enhance the sequences, which is what these techniques are supposed to do. You can use Dutch angles, where you tilt the camera at an angle or various different angles, but if it's just a generic generic sequence of dialogue, there's no point to the Dutch angle. If it's not intended to create a certain mood or atmosphere, or it doesn't create a certain mood or atmosphere on its own, then you just tilted the camera. It's completely pointless. Then there's other instances where this ambitious, in all honesty, show-off direction shows up, where there's just a scene where there's a police officer who's in a car, and for some reason the director decides to do this different camera angle, as if it's from the point of view of somebody on the hood of the car or something looking through the windshield, and it's actually a pretty well put together shot, but that's all it is. It's well done on a superficial level because it adds absolutely nothing to that scene. That scene isn't enhanced at all by that particular choice of camera work. So it's one of those things where he knows the techniques and he knows the tools of the trade, but he doesn't really know how to use them in a way that puts him among even the most average director. So it's one of those things where I think this film would have benefited a lot if Kevin Tenney just directed it. He wrote the film. It would have been nice to have seen him return to the franchise, but instead there's this guy, Jim Kaufman, who did it, who I don't really think really had that much experience before this directing a movie like this, and it ultimately shows. I think he did a fine job working with his actors. I'm pretty sure he ran a pretty good set. But I would not say that this is good direction. I thought his direction was honestly pretty poor for the most part. And also in sequences where he's using lighting and you know, in the climax, or trying to play around with shadows and things like that, it comes across as incredibly amateurish, and it doesn't really it detracts and takes away from the overall potential of those sequences. It makes these scenes look like they're very cheap. Like, there's a lot of stuff in this movie where it looks like it's the equivalent of some really cheap horseshit haunted house show versus a feature film. I've seen a source on Wikipedia say that the budget was $5 million. This looks like it was made for $5, and looks like it was shot for $5. So, where did that money go? I don't buy that. I do not buy that number at all. Here's why I don't buy this number. Because if it costs $5 million to make, that's more money than the first film and the second film combined. I do not buy that this cost $5 million. No, if it did, it's a waste of money. Might as well just wipe their ass with $5 million and lit it on fire, because it would have been the same use. Because there's no... It's not on the screen at any point in this entire movie. So, the direction, it's bad, it's poor. The script by Kevin Tenney isn't much better. That being said, I've heard Kevin come out and say that he's not happy with the film, so maybe his script was better and actually wasn't as flat and dull and boring and banal as the story ultimately was in the finished film. If that's the case, then that's a damn shame. But if it's not, then Kevin also shares some of the blame. Other than a line of dialogue that talks about what happened at the private school, at the climax, you know, the end of Night of the Demons 2, other than a line of dialogue that talks about the massacre at the private school, this really doesn't really feel like much of a sequel. This could easily just be another remake, or something that's just ignoring the events of the second movie and just doing their own thing. And, you know, alright, that's fine. But, and that once again, they try to start off with Angela. She scares this police, this cop who comes over and checks out her house. But it's a pretty nothing sequence. And honestly, there's a lot of nothing sequences in this movie. And honestly, as well, Angela is given a lot of nothing to do. Other than a gun fellatio scene that is honestly a showstopper, other than that sequence, she's not given a lot. She isn't given any grand moments that really stand out, that really stick with you. Like what she was able to do in the first two films. For some reason, once again, they reuse the same stock footage of Angela in the hall from the first movie, and then I think also the furnace again. I'm like, why are we reusing so much fucking stock footage? I get it with the third movie, because I guess their budget is so cheap, but if you actually had $5 million to work with, then no, I don't get it. You don't need to reuse the same fucking shot. So no, they reuse the same shot, and the plot consists of what I like to call this group of grunge band wannabes who get involved in some sort of convenience store failed holdup. The leader of the group, he thinks that he killed a cop, so in a panic he takes everybody, the whole cast and crew of characters, takes them So eventually, actually, he holds them at gunpoint and forces them to hide out at Hull House, and they didn't really have much of a choice anyway because their gas, they were running out of gas because the gas tank got hit by a stray bullet, and so the closest place that they could even hide out at is Hull House. So they hide out at Hull House. Angela starts doing her tricks. Angela turns the new house guests one by one into her minions. She turns one of them into. She takes this one guy, and all she does is there's this mask that he wears to try to scare people. It looks like it's a demon mask. Just makes the demon mask come to life as if like it becomes his face. Basically does a haunted mask routine on him. So one guy just gets a demon mask. Another gal, because she's been for some reason throughout the movie has been having this sock puppet snake. I guess because it turns her boyfriend on or whatever. She has her hand turned into a snake head. It's actually not a bad looking effect for the budget, but it definitely doesn't look like it cost $5 million or even that, even a good portion of that. I mean, you see her final form and it's disappointing. Like Angela says, I'm gonna turn you into a snake, but all that happens is her hand turns into a snake head, and she has like pale makeup on. They really could have gone all out and like given her scales or something, but they don't really do that. Um, Maybe it's because the effects artists that they hired for this movie don't really know how to do stuff like that. But anyway, she gets a snake for a hand. There's another guy who, this character, I'll get to him later, but he gets run over by a car, and then he gets turned into a generic zombie. Uh, and that's really honestly about it. I think there's another guy who gets killed, and then he also turns into like a generic looking monster or whatever. But there's just a lot of just generic stuff. Even Angela's makeup in this looks really cheap, like really cheesy. Like they didn't really. It doesn't look. It looks like it cost a dime or less, 5 cents. Like it looks nothing like the same elaborate makeup from the first two movies. It looks very, very poor in comparison. And there's some other effects where they're trying to do some, like there's in the climax when Angela's going through the portal, her skeleton gets ripped from her body, and it's actually not that bad looking of an effect. But the way that it's directed doesn't really do it justice because a lot of it's just like shot with like a super up close zoom, and so you don't really get the full effect. But then again, that might have been done for a reason. Uh, but yeah, there's just a lot of there's effects. There's a girl gets turned into a cat lady, but it's not really that cool looking. It's just honestly just pretty ugly to look at. So, and maybe that's the intent, but and she really didn't look that much like a cat to me either. And but then again, neither did the cat people in Sleepwalkers. So maybe that's what they were going with. But yeah, makeup effects wise, for a low budget, they try to do some ambitious stuff. They try to do some things, but it doesn't really come across in a way that is particularly impressive. So yeah, I would say that's a miss as well. And then when it comes to the story, like I said, it's just these thugs and the people that are along for the ride. They show up at a Hull House, and Angela turns them, and then there's this whole thing about, oh, if she turns a certain number of people or something, she can walk through the portal or whatever and into our world. And speaking of that, the portal, that's a new thing where now there's a portal that you enter, you go in and out of when you go to Hull House, which reminded me of something that I saw in Waxwork, and I didn't mind that concept to add the portal. And trying to think of. Yeah, there's this subplot with this police captain who's retiring, who's trying to track down the teens, and I'm just like, I don't really give a shit about this cop. I don't care if he retires. I don't care if he dies. I don't care if he gets his heart ripped out of his ass. I don't give a fucking shit one way or another. It just seems like padding to me. And then you have this plot at the end where it's insinuated that the lead girl, Holly, is going to be a Halloween warrior, for instance. She's going to be like a knight against Angela because she's going to show up at the house every Halloween night to make sure it doesn't happen again. And I like that concept. In all honesty, that should have been the plot of this movie. It should have had like a little bit of a flashback in the first 5 minutes with this character and how she survived a night of horror with Angela and her friends got killed or whatever. And as a result, she's decided to make it her duty every Halloween night to try to prevent it from happening again. And so she shows up on Halloween night at Whole House. There's another party going on, and she teams up with the rest of the party guests to hopefully stop Angela's reign of terror once and for all. I don't mind that concept. Sets it up for a sequel that never happens, but that's why it should have just been the original concept instead of just doing a rehash of the first movie. That's really what it is. It's a rehash of the first movie with the exception of they aren't going to a party. They only go to the house because they're afraid that the cops are going to get them. That's really the only difference between the two in terms of how they end up at the house. And none of the gore is particularly memorable. There's one scene that's an absolute showstopper with Angela, which I like to call the gunfellatio scene. I mean, she deep throats a gun and spits out bullets. And that's honestly I thought that was a really great sequence because Kinkade really went all out with that. But other than that scene, there really isn't much to really talk about, let alone remember when it comes to the gore or any of the other supernatural stuff. And for some reason, this film carries on the tradition of having incredibly weak and lame protagonists. What is up with this series and piss poor protagonists that are either weak or unlikable? I don't understand. Like, in all honesty, if you ask me, the only film in this franchise that has a good and likable protagonist is the remake. And I'm serious. Because this film, I don't get into Holly. I don't like her character. I don't think the actress is particularly that good either. She's not like a character that I'm like, oh my god, I hate watching her on screen. But she doesn't do that much. And there's not really much to really like about her. And that's a problem for, honestly, everyone in this cast. There's not a single likable character in this story. And the character development and the character traits and just the act of making these characters enjoyable or entertaining in some way is a massive fail on Kevin Tenney's part. These are just terrible characters, which combined with the piss poor, boring plot, this whole movie is a giant bowl of who gives a fuck. Because really, that's honestly the best way to put this film. It's a giant bowl of who gives a fuck. So, yeah, the script sucks. Then you have the cast. Kinkade, she's the one that... Amelia Kinkade, she's back as Angela. I would say out of everybody in this cast, she's the only one that's worth a shit. But she still isn't able to do that much or really save the film in any capacity because she isn't given that much to work with. She's given a log of shit to work with, and so what mostly comes out is shit, and it's not really her fault. That's what she was given to work with. And maybe these characters, maybe these actors would have done better if they had a better script, but as it is, it's just these characters suck. I mean, you have the leader of the grunge band gang, Vince, played by Kristen Holden-Reid, who's just an asshole. There's nothing even likable about him, like Stooge or any of these other characters from the other films. He's just a fucking asshole. Like, you want to see him get his balls blown off by a shotgun. His buddy or his brother isn't much better. Orson, played by Christian Tessier. The other characters, Gregory Calpakis as Nick, Tara Sloane as Lois, Patricia Rodriguez as Abby, Stephanie Bauder as Holly or Lead, the police lieutenant who's about to retire, Lieutenant Dewhurst, played by Vlasta Vrana. None of these characters, or Joel Gordon as Reggie in particular, I hated that character. And the reason why is not because the character was poorly set up. Like, the character actually out of the group was one of the more likable characters. But then he gets shot in the convenience store craziness. And then for the rest of the movie, until he gets run over and put out of his misery by a truck or a Jeep or whatever the hell it is, he just spends the running time of the film moaning and crying in pain. Whose bright idea was this? To have a character who should have died already of these mortal wounds spend the majority of the movie going, ah, 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 ah. Like, that's just annoying. It's incredibly annoying. Yes, it represents what it's like to sit down and watch this movie, because it is pain, but still, I don't want to be subjected to that over and over again ad nauseum. So yeah, performances really aren't much to write home about. They're really not very good. I can't, other than Angela, other than Amelia Kinkade, and maybe the police chief guy, but I just didn't give a shit about the character, so it didn't really mean that much to me. And from a technical standpoint, it's also a fail. The music, when they're not using tracks by Dennis Michael Tenney from the first movie, I don't even remember a single note by Raymond C. Fabi. The soundtrack, which the back of the DVD tries to pimp out in hilarious fashion. I'm just gonna read this because this is hilarious. It says Demon House has a great soundtrack. If you've seen this film, it does not have a great soundtrack. State of the art special effects. A gritty storyline, yeah, sure, that will enthrall the most demanding aficionados of the genre. No to all of those. An absolute fuck no to all of those. But I appreciate the effort, you know. But yeah, the soundtrack sucks. It's full of songs by bands you don't know who the fuck they are, and you don't care, and you don't really want to listen to them for very much. And it's not like you want to track down any of these tracks. The cinematography is crap. The film looks murky. The film looks dark. Any sequences that are trying to shoot with lights, they look overexposed. It might be just the transfer that I'm watching, but it also could just be simply bad direction mixed with crappy cinematography. The editing isn't particularly egregious, but it's nothing really that great. I guess out of all the technical aspects, it's the best thing, but that's not really saying much. Excuse me. Apparently, the more I talk about this movie, the more I want to vomit. But anyway, I guess maybe I was just thinking about the makeup effects, especially the fucking cheap, lame-ass fucking demon mask shit I'm trying to go with. Looks like something out of Goosebumps. Really, that's what it is. It's the haunted mask. It looks like a mask from the haunted mask. It's not scary. It's not particularly intimidating, and they use this character quite a bit in the movie. Um, the snake head, the cat lady, uh, the makeup is not marvelous. It's a flight of stairs down from Steve Johnson's work in the first two, and it's only 88 minutes, but it does not go by at a good pace. There's a lot of moments where you're looking at your watch, even if you don't have one, because you're so bored. Uh, it's just one of those films where there's really not much going for it. It's like I said, I've seen worse sequels, I've seen worse horror films, but this is ranks right up there with one of the most dullest, most boring, flat, tedious, tiresome, and terrible sequels that I've seen. In that regard, I've seen worse films in terms of the way that they're shot, when it comes to the storytelling, the characters. The thing is, other than the grunge band assholes, I didn't really hate any of the heroes, but I just didn't give a fuck because I didn't really care about the characters. They weren't unlikable. They just weren't likable in the sense that I didn't really care what happened to them. Just very indifferent about their fate. And that leads to an incredibly boring film because there's no suspense, there's no thrills, because you're like, I don't really care. You're just waiting for it to all end. You're waiting for the night to end and the moment when the end credits roll. But yeah, and that laughably bad opening credits sequence. I mean, it bears repeating. It really does. Like, I don't know what the director was thinking. I think he was like, "Hey, I'm gonna do a homage to the original Night of the Demons with the animated sequence," but doesn't have the budget, doesn't know what he's doing, and because it doesn't have the budget, the sequence is incredibly awful and crappy because they just reuse the same renders over and over again, and they just flip the image around a couple times to try to make it look like it's a different shot, but you could tell it's the same shot. And the CGI is laughably bad. It looks like the CGI of the Human Torch in the 1994 unreleased Fantastic Four movie. It looks that level of shit. It's on that level of just absolute cringe and pure crap. So this is a film that I honestly I'm not surprised it's not on Blu-ray. I don't think it needs to be on Blu-ray, but for the completionists out there, they probably would like it to be on Blu-ray. But I don't think high definition is gonna do this movie any favors, especially not that computer-generated intro. But yeah, I don't really know what else to say about Night of the Demons 3 except if you feel like you have to watch all the Night of the Demons movies, I guess give it a watch sometime. Who knows, you might end up liking it more than me. But other than that, if you're not doing a Night of the Demons marathon, or you're not already a Night of the Demons super fan after seeing the first film or the second movie, I would definitely recommend skipping this. Like, this is not something that you have to run out and see by any means. And if you are going to check it out, I would only get it for cheap or find it streaming somewhere. I would not pay somebody an arm and a leg for the out of print artisan DVD. I would not fucking do that. It is not worth it, trust me. But anyway, thanks for watching my rant on Night of the Demons 3, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.